our next session runs under the banner of the Digital Metropolis. And what we're particularly interested in here is how new technologies, connectivity, changes the way cities are governed and run. And obviously that is about how citizens use technology to talk with city governments, and in the opposite direction, how city governments better communicate with their citizens. And how can these digital management systems actually make our cities more efficient places, also more inclusive places? Where does this work well in the world, and what lessons can we learn from those places? And we have a terrific panel here, although they're all male, and I object to that in principle. You can join the panel. We have a terrific panel here who can answer this question. So please welcome Mansell Nelson, who's the Vice President of Machine-to-Machine for Rogers Wireless, and he's obviously dealing with these possibilities of the digital metropolis in real-time marketplace. Joe Greenwood on the other side is stepping in for our guest from Boston, who unfortunately had a sick child. Joe is part of the talent strategy at Mars, where we take extremely talented people from other countries, and we use pheromones, i.e. they partner up with charming Canadians and move to Canada. So we were very fortunate to bring Joe, who is an expert in open share data, and he's working on our own efforts to better connect isolated data sources here at Mars. Bill Hutchison is very well known in this community. He's chair and co-founder of iCanada, and really a pioneer of using digital technologies in urban and industrial settings, and he's worked obviously in Toronto, but more recently very active in a large expansion in Moscow, where he's leading a new initiative for Ernst & Young. And then Jeff Lehman, we're very delighted to have him with us, Mayor of Barrie, doing some very innovative things from the perspective of a mid-sized city that's close but not too close to a larger urban center. And our chair, Kim de Vugt, who's Cisco's vice president for the public sector, and obviously Cisco being a major agent in connectivity, both in health, energy, education, and transportation. So, Kim, over to you.
Well, thanks, Elsa, and sorry for the gender imbalance on the panel. But if it makes you feel any better, I got a lot of mail addressed to Miss Kim de Vugt, so that's at least I can contribute a little bit. So thanks everyone. I think this should be a lively discussion, and what I'm going to do is we'll have a bit of a panel discussion here for maybe about 22 minutes and 56 seconds. At which point we'll open it up to the floor for engagement from the audience. So let me start with this being a topic around the digital metropolis. I'd like to get each one of the panel members' own vision in a couple of minutes about what it means to be a digital metropolis. Let's start with that. So why don't we start, Mansell, on your end, and we'll work across.
Great. So I think, I'm obviously biased towards what I do every day, which is work on the whole 50 billion connected devices, which is what I'm working for at Rogers. And I think our vision of the connected world is this fully networked world where everything's talking to each other. And I think, how do we actually take all this data that's being generated, leverage it to actually create a better experience for government and the citizens, of the cities that we operate into. And I think we're kind of living it today. We're seeing silos of these things happening. And what we're really trying to push upon is how do we take all these disparate data events that are happening out there, leverage it together, and create events that improve citizens' lives or help businesses run their or governments run their day-to-day operations. It's a very siloed approach we're seeing out there today, and really trying to focus on how do you start to bring these things together. And as those come together, I think the citizens become digital citizens because we're presenting them with much more information than they're receiving today.
Thank you. So Bill, I'm sure you have a few thoughts on this, and being right in the eye of the hurricane in the Moscow project, as well as all your experience here, of course. Maybe you can share your thoughts.
Well, thank you, Kim. We've been very polite for the last number of sessions, starting first thing this morning. Everybody's been saying things are pretty good, but geez, we better get a little better. But you know, too bad the governments are funding things the wrong way, but John Tory chaired a session here a little earlier and said, yeah, not bad, you know, we've sort of dropped from first to fourth in telecom, but that's not a problem. We have a big problem. And so you asked what's my vision for the metropolis in the future, Canadian metropolis. Well, my vision would be that our Canadian metropolis and Canada would once again, as we were 20 years ago, become a world leader in communications infrastructure and telecommunications, the use of the internet, and all the rest. First of all, and this is supposed to be about open data, so then we can take advantage of the open data that everybody's providing. The challenge today is that a number of cities are doing some very effective things and moving forward with respect to open data. There's a big study about to get underway between IT World Canada and iCanada. There's 6 cities in it and some others coming on, and they're really studying it, and we're doing great things. If this was sort of 1915 or something, I'd say the equivalent would be Ford came out and said, we're going to give everybody a whole lot of cars. That's a nice deal, lots of data equivalent. Sorry, you still have to run on gravel roads. I hate to tell you, but today our communications infrastructure is gravel roads compared to the rest of the world. I'm spending half my time in Moscow. They have 5 times as much bandwidth into each house for the same price that we have here. Now, one of the challenges, and I was saying this the other night, I was at a meeting with some mayors, and Worship Mayor Brad Woodside was there, and I started and said, you know, I feel like the guy, if I was trying to sell a vacuum cleaner when nobody had vacuum cleaners, and I came into the backyard and it was a housewife then, was whacking the carpet on the clothesline. And I said, I've got this thing that could be really good. No, we don't want one of those. You got the nice sunlight and everything on my carpet. And the problem is nobody here, except those who are in the research and education world with Canary and Orion, have ever experienced collaboration at a gigabit per second. And the problem is when you talk about these high-speed networks, it's like people say, well, why do I need to spend $1 billion to download a movie faster? It's an entirely different world. We're way behind. A report just came out last week, dropped us by 4 more levels. I think we're 17th, we're second from bottom. Romania is better than Canada. So I think we have to get our head out of the sand. And so iCanada is starting a petition today, and we're expecting to present it to the federal government. It's not just about the government, but it's about all of us. But as Peanuts or Snoopy or somebody said, I've seen the enemy, and it's us. So I think we got to...
It was Pogo, actually.
It was Pogo. So we've got to get moving as a group and say, how do we change it instead of meeting all the time? I've been doing this for 50 years, meeting. And we've got great people here. We can do this, fellows and folks and gals. But we got to get together as part of a movement and solve this problem. Innovation, we're now second from bottom in our innovation index worldwide. So, you know, I heard about our new card, but Metrolinx, and with all respect, I used one of those cards 10 years ago in Hong Kong. So we're coming out with a card when, as Renato said in that panel, everybody else is starting to put it on mobile. Folks, we are way behind. Canada can do it. We've done great engineering projects in the past, but I think we got to step it up. So that's my little opening remark.
I'm not sure everybody got what you meant there, Bill, but we'll get...
Anybody want a vacuum cleaner?
You'll get a chance to add to that in a minute.
So it's my vision for how does a digital world enable a metropolis? And in a metropolis, we're used to having the public things that connect us together, our roads, our railways, our public spaces. We're used to how that happens, and so how does our data and our network and our connect us in a public realm? How can I interact with my healthcare system, with our transit system, with all those public things that we take for advantage? But also critically, our private realm. We also recognize that a huge amount of the metropolis is private. It's owned by companies, it's owned by individuals, as are all the digital data assets. All the services we consume and we like to use are also very often in private hands. We've got to get a handle on how those two merge. How does data flow from the very private or the public realm, if governments and if cities? How does that get used by companies to provide services that are really valuable and help us work better, help us use our metropolis smarter, help us use the infrastructure we have? And open data is an important part, but my data is even more important. So the data that we hold as individuals has to merge with the data that our government holds. And do we have a problem? There are some heroic efforts in Canada, led by cities, Ottawa, London, Toronto, among others. But it is realistically 5 to 6 years behind where the leaders in this game are in the US, in the UK, and elsewhere. And those have really active agendas to build communities, to build economies around data and around shared data. So if you want to address some of that innovation index issues, if you want to use the assets you have, then there is some real work to be done.
Jeff.
Right. So I'm the mayor of the city of Barrie. For those of you who are from the GTA, we like to think of ourselves as the city above Vaughan. We're 135,000 people. So I'm not sure about the Metropolis moniker, but I'm going to tell you what my vision is for a digital city. The corporation of which I'm the CEO delivers 60 different services. It's a very wide range of things to deliver. And my vision is to use technology to modernize the way we deliver those 60 services. And I'll give you an example in a moment. But the question of what is a digital metropolis, to me, it's two things. And one's been said many times before, which is it's a city with systems that speak to one another electronically and are integrated and coordinated through technology. But the second aspect, and it was touched on this morning, I think it's a much bigger question. To me, it's a city where the democratic space is online. And we are seeing an enormous adoption of not only social media, but other online tools, mobile websites and applications, to facilitate a conversation with our citizens, which is accelerating at a pace that is truly remarkable. And I believe it's absolutely incumbent on cities to take advantage of that opportunity because for a whole bunch of reasons, from the fact of our climate in Canada, right through to the universality of it. There are opportunities and potential through communication with citizens through social media and a relationship that is possible, a direct relationship that is possible between government and people that was not possible before. It's also fraught with dangers, and I'm sure we'll get into some of that. And it's at the moment suffers from a lack of accountability as well, which makes it kind of a dangerous place at times as well. But there's a tremendous opportunity. So my own vision for my city and the corporation, the 60 services that we deliver, is that people will voluntarily create through the City of Barrie's website a profile. And that profile will include what kind of rec programs you want to be part of. It will include your services such as, and I hate to say it, paying your taxes, paying your parking tickets, but cultural events, notification of cultural events and sporting events in the city. It will be a profile and an interactive relationship in terms of services. The very quick example I'll give you used to be if you wanted to sign your kid up for hockey, you lined up in a rec center, sometimes in the parking lot, and you went through a paper process and somebody took the piece of paper and wrote all the information down and signed you up for hockey. Well, for 10 or 15 years it's been possible to do that online and many cities have done that. But what they haven't done yet is start to push notification out to residents to say, here, click here, sign up again. And to start to fill programs and use services in a different way. And I'll give some examples of that when we get into the discussion, I imagine. But I see something that is profile-based and can also be used for the democratic conversation, the conversation between citizens and government. The other quick example I'll give and leave it there is we recently had a debate over the introduction of CCTV cameras, security cameras, in an area of our city which has a large number of bars. There's some concerns about what happens there at closing time, and we were proposing, the police are, to introduce a CCTV camera system for a small area of the city. We had an open house. That's the traditional way of consulting with the public, right? You hold a meeting and ask people to come to City Hall and show up and give us their opinion. We were there for 2 hours. The chief of police was there. I was there, a number of police officers. And we had about 15 people over 2 hours. I put the same question out on Twitter. I had 60 replies in 8 minutes and over 100 within an hour. It's fundamentally changing the way citizens and government can talk to one another, and it's a direct relationship, which is the wonderful thing about it. So technology can enable that, and in a digital metropolis, that's why I say I believe the democratic space is increasingly going to be online.
Okay, so I'm going to switch the order of a couple of these questions here just based on this. So let's talk for a minute about and get your thoughts together around where you see the business opportunities exist, just extending on what Jeff talked about here, but in a city context, right? So I mean both from a public sector point of view and a private sector point of view. Where's the inherent value there, and how does creating a digital environment, a digital metropolis, enable you to harvest and capture those things? I'm then going to come back with a question about how we're going to make that happen, but let's start with what the opportunities are, right? Mm-hmm. Anybody who wants to jump in to begin with that one?
I'll kick it off if you want.
You want to start?
I think there are a lot of great business opportunities. When you think of it, as the data starts to become more and more available from communities, we're already seeing this in some countries. You'll see, first of all, companies being created that will specialize in using some of those kinds of data, getting back to the communities, to the municipalities, with new ways they can use it. In some cases, selling information back to the cities, new ways of being more efficient on transportation, for example. At the same time, I think subject to the data and who owns it and everything, there are opportunities already for companies that are taking the data and massaging it and providing it in other ways that people are paying subscriptions for. I think separate from the data, there will be opportunities, and there already are lots of smaller communications companies that are getting involved, independents, and as well as the large ones that will find there's more and more communications traffic needed. So just in those areas to start, I think there are a lot of great business opportunities.
I mean, a lot of what we do today with cities is, I'll say, solving business problems. So you take things like transportation systems. People want to know when the buses are going to arrive. How do we predict when a bus is going to arrive? Parking meters, all these types of infrastructure things. And I think there's really two ways data is generated. One is it on Twitter, or it's by a human interacting. And there's this big wave of data, automated data, what we call machine to machine, or this connected revolution that's coming. And I think it's a combination of both. But the power really starts to, I think it starts with what are the problems you want to solve. Is it predicting when buses arrive? Is it solving, smart meters for electricity, reducing demand on the system? What are all these things that are going on out there? And I think the challenge with all this data is, how do you translate it in something that has a need to the end user? I think smart meters are a great example of utilities have gone and put them in, but as a consumer, very little change has happened to the consumers, for example. So I still go home on a day like yesterday and the dryer's running, on the hottest day of the year so far. And my wife kind of says, well, why don't you just drink one less Starbucks this month? And that's good. So I think what we have to do is figure out, how do you take all these different data points and put them into something that means something to somebody, as opposed to you could have saved 28 cents, because that's just kind of a displacement issue. Is it kind of leveraging social influence to say, you're a gold star power user because you use no power during peak, all these kinds of things. So I think we really need to figure out in the digital domain, what is it the end user, what actually motivates them to change or act differently, and vetting through all these gazillion bits of data that are going to be generated.
I think a key thing is that there's an opportunity to reinvent how we interact with all parts of our daily life. So get me on the bus quicker, and there's value there because now citizens aren't spending as much time. So there's a wider economic gain, as we've heard previously. There's also a direct business in supplying that. In the consumption of around electricity data and the services you can do on the back of that, and also therefore selling conservation programs, selling local services, selling new equipment off the back of that. In healthcare, in mobile applications and personal health, in a whole variety of aspects, from solving how do I get my garbage out on time? It's the kind of one of the apps that developed first in the every open data activity that went out was around pieces like that, around promoting local businesses, making it easier for people to find local businesses, so generating local income there. So that's just from really basic, boring bits of data that cities and utility type information companies sit on. that can reinvent a whole variety of our really basic pieces.
You know, we track garbage trucks today, and it just dawned on me, I often miss getting the garbage out on time. Why can't somebody take that information when the truck's at least a kilometer away from my house and tell me?
Wake you up.
Yeah,
Well,
wake me up, tell me whatever, at least it's coming, right? And that would have value to me because I'm in big trouble now, usually.
Yeah.
And but it's those little things that are out there today that, you know, somebody's decided to track the garbage or, you know, fleet for a good reason. Maybe it's efficiency, operational efficiency, but nobody's taking it to the next step and saying, how do I take where that thing is and actually leverage that information to do better things?
It's a great example. Wouldn't it be great if you had a special ringtone when the garbage truck was 10 minutes away, right? The phone just rang.
Yeah.
But two quick examples, one which exists, one which doesn't. We recently put automatic meter readers on all our water meters. So a little puck-sized device that goes onto your water meter at your house, and it transmits every 15 minutes your water consumption through the cell network to our control center. So now, as a business opportunity for us, no longer do we have to have people walking around reading water meters. But the real value in it is we now detect leaks in your home because of a spike in consumption within 15 minutes, whereas before we might not ever detect it till you got your water bill. That's a huge saving to the consumer. It's a big saving to the city. And that's an ideal kind of win-win business opportunity, a true public-private kind of opportunity. The other one that doesn't exist yet, we talked this morning about transportation. What if you had an app where you could drop a pin, you'd stand out here at college and university and drop a pin on the waterfront in Barrie, and the app would tell you the ways to get there. You can take the GO train, you could drive, you can take a bus. And it actually had full cost pricing for that trip. That's not that far away. And we don't have the political will yet, and I'm a politician, to implement anything close to full cost pricing for transportation, but we should. And at some point, the technology is going to make that possible. And I think that could be a game changer, not only in terms of a business opportunity, but in a way to correct a lot of the problems that we heard in the panel this morning.
Thanks. So let's just keep moving here. So how do we make this happen? I mean, what, you know, back to your point, Bill, I think we need to get on with it. Well, we haven't got on with it, and I tend to agree with you in terms of where our position is on the Innovation Index and our investment in digital infrastructure. We're in a global knife fight in this country, and a lot of us don't know it. I think everybody, we're probably preaching to the converted here, but let's face it, we know that. We know we're into it. So the question is, how are we going to make this happen? Not from a, you know, from an architecture point of view. This isn't a technical question. It's more a question of governance and leadership. So how do we make this happen? And then, assuming that does happen, how does it revolutionize the governance model of cities? I mean, Jeff, you talked a bit about basically changing the democratic dynamic to go from, you know, physical town hall to using Twitter. What are other examples? How does it change that? So how are we going to make it happen? What are the steps we've got to put in place to make it happen, and how does it change the dynamic of how cities run?
Well, go ahead.
Go ahead, Bill.
No.
You started this.
Well, I better keep it up. So, yeah, it isn't a technical issue. It's a leadership issue. There's no question about it. I've been very involved in the smart city intelligent community business for 20 years. Glasgow won the Intelligent Community of the Year award back in 2004. I lived in Hamilton, Ontario, and I lived in Glasgow back in the 50s when things got moved out of Hamilton. Hamilton did nothing for about 45 years. They're starting to do some things now. I don't know if anybody's here. Glasgow won the award, created 60,000 new jobs. It's all about leadership. The cities that are around here and communities that you've seen, and you'll see some more of the mayors, it's all about leadership. And so how do we, but the public sector has to be involved, and I'm probably as right-wing as anybody else in the private sector and everything else. The fact is, on communications today, it's a public issue, and the public sector has to be involved. Bell and others could pay for the network from the long-distance calls and everything years ago. To implement an interactive medical call, as you do in Sweden today, from your television to a nurse to get Johnny diagnosed, and the doctor gets on, and it's 15 minutes, and maybe Johnny has to go into some place. No communication company can collect enough money for that call to help pay for the fact that you just had a call from the doctor and a visit for whatever, 20 or 30 bucks instead of 300 bucks. We could save $20 billion a year in Canada out of our 100 billion a year if we wired up the country properly. But that's just one issue. And as I said earlier, no great cities run on gravel roads, and we're gravel roads today. So it's about the leadership. We have tremendous leadership at the community levels. The communities, we've got great islands of excellence in Canada too, by the way, with respect to local communications examples and all the rest. So it's a leadership issue. How do we convince some of our provincial leaders, not all, some are leading, and how do we convince the federal government that they really have to take a look at this? And it's not about, you know, get after Bell or Rogers or anybody else. We're all in it together. We're all citizens, and we've got regulatory systems and everything. So how do we kind of take the whole thing and say, what are we going to do? And it's not just about Singapore. Everybody says, well, they little island, they can do it. Australia has bitten the bullet. $43 billion, fiber to every home. And it's being done today. So, and they've got lots of geography. So I think we need a movement that has to be strong enough to convince those politicians that they better act. And that's why we're starting the petition with iCanada. iCanada is a volunteer organization to helping communities become intelligent, because if they do, they get higher economic growth rates, higher employment, and everything else. So I'm hoping that everybody from this meeting will sign the petition and we'll get going. But I really believe we need a movement, because...
Are you going to have it out in the lobby? Or?
Yeah,
okay.
That's right. Barrie Gander right there will give you the Twitter number and everything else. That's right. But I think it's a movement. It's not, it won't just change.
Okay, thanks.
I mean, I was going to say,
go ahead, Mansell.
My sense is, I mean, you know, I spend more of my time with private enterprises than, you know, governments and cities, but I think the model is the same. When private enterprises invest in things, be it an M2M type of solution, whatever I'm selling, they actually say, I'm going to change my processes, I'm going to do things differently, I'm going to save some money over here, so therefore I can invest in this thing and we're better off. My theory in public or private is there's more than enough money in the system. It's sitting in the wrong buckets today. And if you want to build a big broadband infrastructure, you know, you need to change the medical system that says, well, doctors only get paid when people physically walk in those offices. Yep. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that's got to get changed. So I think the money's there. But, you know, this massive process change in the way we do things has to happen. That's the way it happens in private practice, and I don't understand why it can't happen in public if the will's there.
Yeah.
I think maybe two things in response, picking up on that. Government doesn't have any money right now, and that's actually true. All three levels of government in Canada are in the midst of austerity for very good reasons. There's piles of private capital sitting on the sidelines, also for good reason. But, and I would agree with you, in that situation, you change the rules so that the private capital can see a return on the investment of that capital. And maybe that's what gets us from gravel roads to paved roads. I guess on Bill's point of we need a movement, I think the tools are there for that. And I can tell you that the nature of local government is such that it's not too hard to make a lot of noise on an issue. If you can get a group of individuals together, if you can talk about an issue online, if you can raise it with your council members, that moves my council. I mean, one of the great virtues of city government, as opposed to provincial and federal government, aside from the fact that we're not whipped to vote any specific way, we can all vote our conscience, at least in theory, is that it's much more accessible. It is right there in front of you. And frankly, not just physically, but online. So if we do want to move a level of government, cities are the right level to try and move, because I think we actually are easier to move.
I think another thing is that whilst we might not have much monetary assets within governments, or they're restricted, we need to start looking at information, the data they sit on, as an asset that other people could do smarter things with, or other things with that they can do. So what are those assets that you can start to get moving? And the smart meter data is a great example where it's sitting in various bits of, well, utilities, extensions of the public realm, and get that to work in consumer applications, in business applications, and in large-scale commercial applications, and just demonstrate the basic idea that data and assets that you have could be used to drive applications and economic activity elsewhere, and to show and highlight that. We also need business to start to advocate that they need access to those resources that government sits on. So the government can, and cities and extensions of that, can provide access to those resources. But there's a capacity issue as well. So you have to get to grips with some very complex ideas around data rights, access, reuse, some of the economic and technical aspects that sit around how data is used and governed. And there's a real capacity issue in getting to grips with that, and a cultural one. So those are all the kind of nitty-gritty things you then need to build some ability to really deal with and get a handle on.
Okay, I'm going to open it up here after this question. So I'm going to ask one more, and so those of you in the audience get ready to pose your questions to the panel. So let me just build on the question, or the comments that both, I think, Bill and Jeff talked about around value and where the money comes from. We actually, when we were in the ante room there before, we got into just a little bit of a discussion around value and trying to harness the value. I don't think that what Bill's talking about in terms of trying to ensure that we have the enabling infrastructure in place he's not suggesting we do that because it would be mildly interesting. I think we want to do that because we're trying to create an economic and social environment so people will make the right location decisions for themselves, for their families, for their investment dollars, and they have a great environment to live and work and grow their businesses, their families. The question, and by the way, every country in the world is trying to do exactly the same thing. Everybody's just trying to improve their lot in life, regardless of the political system. The question is, we talk a lot about, in these kinds of environments, because you can't necessarily put your hands on the specific dollar to make it happen, we talk a lot about public-private partnerships or different business models. So I'm not going to ask for a definition. What I'm going to ask for is, what do you think the critical success factors are around those business models to make this work? What should we be looking for, and what should we avoid? Because we've got lots of examples, I think, of both in various forms of physical and digital infrastructure that have happened to try to enable this. Question? Thought? What's on your list on the good side and the bad side?
Typically, businesses want to make money at the end of the day. They're motivated by their shareholders. So I think, the odd time, somebody like Rogers will do something philanthropically, but for the most part, these are business decisions, and that's what our shareholders, would expect. So I think it's really about finding, those sweet spots where it can align.
Right.
I think it really it has to be a win-win for everybody. It can't be a rip-off by the corporate sector on the city or anybody else. There has to be a benefit to the community. And you can get there, and it doesn't necessarily mean public sector money. John Campbell is speaking later, and John may talk a little about the communications network that's going in down there. But that's all, that's not government money. That's, private sector investment, but new kinds of formulas that have been created, and with a win for everybody. So I think in all cases, the other thing is, governments, it's been proven through a lot of research that if governments just send the right signals, we think this is really important, business actually starts to invest in that area, even if the government doesn't put any money in it. It's interesting how it happens, and it's happened over the years. And so just sending signals and maybe doing a little bit to help it, but so it's not that somebody's coming saying, hey, we need 50 billion or something like that. Totally isn't. So I think win-win is the real key. It's got to be structured, and there is money around, and you have to be creative about it.
I think getting to that value piece requires being able to find the individuals who are actually willing to listen, and on both sides, both from a public sector and the government side, and understand some of the issues at hand and appreciate some of the pressures that those individuals are under. So that you can start to talk through scenarios and start to build out how a flow of things or interactions might happen between those organisations. Often that means getting some of the political pressure off of staff within the government sector. The politicisation and the desire to prove something small or immediate near term in a distorted way can actually hinder a lot of those. So getting those at least temporarily off the table or finding ways to work through them can actually give you the time you need to get to those value points. That's quite an early upfront bit to kind of get through.
Okay.
So in short, I used to be an economist before I was mayor, so an awful dinner party guest. But when we used to do public sector comparisons, I mean, the value proposition for a true public-private partnership has to include the profit for the private sector partner. So if you're going to deliver it in the public sector with a 0% profit margin, and you've got the private sector expecting a 7% profit margin, you've got to find 7% in value. That's a true partnership. Otherwise, I think what you're introducing is either defraying costs through unique financing, which is just a different way of financing a project. So the success factor to me is a true sharing of risk and a true benefit to the public sector side from the efficiency or the service delivery model, like that automatic meter reading example I was giving you before with the water meters. There is a clear benefit there that greatly exceeded the cost of whatever profit margin was involved in our contract to introduce that technology.
So I'll open it up to the floor now. We have a little bit of time here. Questions? Over here.
My question is for the mayor. There is lots of money out there. The question is trying to get past these guys called procurement officers. Whose job they think it is to make sure that none of it goes anywhere except where they decide it's going to go. We had a case in Ottawa recently where a very innovative group proactively came forward, looked at some land in Ottawa, Lansdowne Park, said we can build something beautiful there, and there was a group decided to take the court over the procurement process. Nothing to do with what the actual outcome was, just the process. All we have to do is turn to the Supreme Court, and they threatened to take it to the Supreme Court of Canada until the city said, if you do, you lose, we're coming after you for legal costs. So they had to take a tough stand. So at what point, and that came from the mayor's office, so at what point does the mayor have to go out and say, look, I want us to be innovative, we've got to relax the procurement rules, find young companies here that have got some groundbreaking procurement, and take a risk on doing something here. At what point are you politically prepared to step on your procurement officers and say, you just got to do this?
About a week after I got elected. You're absolutely right. My personal view is that the biggest threat to Canada, to Canadian society right now, is liability or fear of liability is trumping humanity, basic humanity to one another, and it's trumping value, good ideas and innovation. And you're absolutely right. Unfortunately, and some of this I think is the fallout from things like MFP and other issues, certainly not unique to Toronto, but the MFP inquiry certainly changed procurement for municipalities in Ontario. And there are other examples. The pendulum has swung much too far. It swung too far in Barrie. We have had to go back, having introduced a new procurement bylaw, and make changes. The fact is, you can't let process kill innovation. Did Sandra Papatello say that this morning? I think she did, and it was a great point, because it's a balance. And you're absolutely right, in my opinion, that the pendulum has swung too far. So now you have to be able to defend your decisions, because Orange and other things show us that, in the interests of innovation, things can get out of hand. So, the balance between proper due diligence, and innovation, allowing enough flexibility for innovation, is not an easy balance. But it is one that if you step back and say, what is the true value to my municipality, to my citizens, to my region, that is not usually really what is in our procurement bylaws. Our procurement bylaws are not, or processes are not usually, they say they are about best value, but they're not. And the pendulum will need to swing back a bit in many cities.
Anybody else want to comment on that? That was well answered.
Clearly, none of you had to do business with us yet.
Well, I think
It's going to be easier.
I think we all have lots of procurement stories, but we only have 17 minutes. So at the back here.
Sorry, this is more maybe a bit of a comment. Interesting talking about digitized metropolis, but maybe we should talk about digitized citizens, because I'm from London, Ontario, do economic development there, and we had a very embarrassing public debate around open data in our city. Many developers, out of their own free will, wanted to develop apps that would make life a lot easier for London citizens, and at the time the city refused to open and let that data be free. What they wanted to make apps on was garbage pickup, because our schedule was really difficult, and transit. Really arguably innocuous data that it's very easy for the city to open that up, but there's this fear that the municipal government was holding that, oh my goodness, if we let the public have access to this data, what are they going to do? The development community just hacked the data and built the apps anyway, and it became a really popular thing in the city because you could download an app that does send you a text message when your garbage is about to come by your door. So ultimately enhancing quality of life, which is ultimately what a digital community or metropolitan should be doing. So I think, Bill, you made an excellent point about political leadership. And I think there needs to be the federal provincial discussion about investing in the infrastructure that's going to let that happen. But then on the local level, like, it's really the municipal governments that have to open up the information and let citizens own it. We just went through a miraculous change. Our city government put out the entire budget for somebody to make a budget app so citizens could get engaged in the budget process and follow it and understand what that means. So I think that there's different kinds of leadership. And from the city perspective, it's really politicians or bureaucrats figuring out how to free the information, because citizens really just want to have access to it to make their lives easier.
Can I make a quick comment and respond?
Absolutely.
First of all, there's a budget app. I've been wasting all this time on Angry Birds. Now I know what I'm going to spend my time on. I think it's so funny that those are the two apps that London wanted to do, because those are the two we're doing right now. We're doing a transit app right now, and garbage is probably number 2. And I've had this battle internally myself. I don't understand what is so secret about location data for our buses. Why on earth can't that be public? There is no reason, unless they're driving out of town and doing things they shouldn't, which I know they're not. How do you hide a bus anyway? I mean, honestly, I think there is a sense within government at all levels, and I don't think we're unique in this, that any data we hold, we must keep airtight, airlocked, because it's government. And it's an attitude that fundamentally has to change. I would love it if somebody out there was able to build some of these apps for us. I am not inviting anyone to try and hack our website. I'll tell you that right now. But I'll tell you, the information exists, and I don't know why we, as government, have an attitude that stuff like that has to stay private.
Power.
Maybe.
There's a great case study from Chicago and other cities where they did open it up, and they actually quantified the value of their applications if they had bought them. Oh, and that was the savings to government. Yeah. There's another example from a place like Ottawa where they looked at certain applications which diverted traffic out of the call centre. So again, direct saving to government. Some great examples in Manchester, UK, where they found out where someone else decided to look at all the different pieces of procurement that had happened and found that there were duplicate procurements going on. So they eliminated savings by getting other people to look over essentially their books, which then opened up. So there's kind of real obvious money, direct savings to corporations.
Fantastic. Do you have a business card? Actually, wasn't that good? There's also people like Deloitte have done a lot of work on what is the economic value of public sector information, particularly in Europe. And it's a staggering 20 billion euros a year could be released if they understood how to get that used. So that's things like consumer welfare gain, i.e. consumers are spending less doing stuff like sitting in traffic. So there's a surplus, because you can route them. You get efficiency within government. That's the next really big one it hits. Then there's direct commercialisation. And we have to look at those other two. What do consumers do easier? And there's a value to that. How do governments run more efficiently? Those are big numbers you can shift. Then actually the direct commercialisation is probably the smaller business opportunity. But there's active work trying to get that, looking at that, understanding the numbers and getting people actually working with that stuff.
Yeah. Great, thanks. Pat.
Yeah, hi, Pat Horgan from IBM. Actually, I was surprised that doesn't appear that this information's out there, but datacatalog.org so Edmonton has posted 246 of their schedules. I think garbage is one of them, but actually some of the more interesting one is open property and their values and what's listed. It has traffic patterns, it has construction, which would be obvious for traffic patterns as well. But 246 are listed. Vancouver is now a beta that's just coming up. And I think there are 5 other Canadian cities and many other cities that are saying that data as a service to my citizens needs to be put out there. And what's being done with it is they've gotten over the hurdle of saying it's a private thing that is us for ourselves, and it's maybe the point that would start the movement, which is well, if that city's doing it, I better do it, because other people will see us falling behind, right? So I think that's the kind of thing that really makes a difference. And it's very interesting. You can go to the app, the website yourself. There is interesting information that I think is progressive, and I think that's what might make a difference. But start by, I guess they didn't get through a big argument that blocked them. They decided that they could post it, and they are looking as a progressive city as a comparison to others by doing it. So anyway, datacatalog.org.
I
Barrie?
can provide a list of URLs if anybody's interested.
Hang on a sec. Wait for the mic here, Barrie. Throw it.
Thank you. If anybody's interested, I'm Barrie Gander. I can provide a list of URLs of cities and their open data applications. So I invite you to send an email if you wish to barriegander@cata.ca. Thank you.
Other questions? Stuff, I got the lights here, so let me see if I can see anybody. There's one over here.
Yes. So I'm with an American company called the Alliance for Innovation. We work with local governments in Canada and U.S. You all could, there are sites with free apps. Code for America has built a whole line of apps that are just free for downloading. They're all for local governments. If you come to our website, we have a knowledge center that you can go and click on information technology and find out what the coolest things people are doing. Most everybody's doing this on a shoestring. If someone comes and tries to sell you something really expensive, especially in the app business, don't get taken. Also, there's a lot of stuff on transparency, and it is absolutely what's happening in the U.S. I'm surprised that you guys are ahead in a lot of places, but this is not one.
Right. I'm not sure we actually got that. What did you mean by that? No, that's good. Any other questions out there? Here's one right here. Wait for the, we get a mic over here, please? Right in the center.
All this local stuff and grassroots stuff is well, but there is stuff that still has to be legislated from above, like e-health. Where are we? We're in a limbo.
So, exactly. I mean, some people may say, well, if we're doing things locally, that's great. Why do we need the federal government involved? The fact is that some of these applications, there are all kinds of regulatory issues, I mean, not the least of which is you got to be able to pay a doctor to make a virtual call. There are all kinds of things there. Telecommunications industry is structured as a regulatory framework. One little rant I like to get on is we don't have the Ford Highway and the Volvo Highway and the General Motors and the Mercedes Highway today. We have a highway, and all the content runs on the public highway. So why do we necessarily have all kinds of different networks that we put the content on? A lot of parts of the world are moving to open access networks that are either community owned or somebody may own them, but then it's about competition at the content level. To move to those levels, there are regulatory issues as well. So the reason the federal government has to be a party to this discussion is there are regulatory issues as well as financial and other kinds of issues. So you're absolutely right. There's a whole, that's why you really have to create some sort of a national, not a commission, God, but some sort of a group that sits down and says, okay, folks, how are we going to be number one? This was done in 1990 when the federal government said, how do we become a leader in gigabit networking by the year 2000? They were focusing in particular on the research and education networking world. That led to the creation of Canary in support of all of the regional research networks. But my friends, the mayors, of course, always point out that people are going to shoot at you. I was the chairman that chaired the steering committee that caused Canary to come into existence and then chaired it. As soon as we picked the name, after 2.5 years of doing the business planning and what should we do and we came up with the Canadian Network for the Advancement of Research, Industry and Education. Canary en français, great. I went back to my office in Toronto. We picked it in Montreal. The next day, the Ottawa Citizen, which didn't like the idea because it looked like the public sector getting involved, half-page story, and the headline was, "This bird will never fly." And it's still flying since 1993. So not everybody's going to be with you, but we all have to bite the bullet, get together, and really solve a number of issues if we want to get to the top ranks. Moscow has a big open data program. It's going to be interesting to see what kind of data they're going to allow out, but they too are joining the parade.
Wow, that's a big opening for that one, but we'll leave that one alone.
I know.
I think
sorry, go ahead.
there's some other aspects around government IT investment where if you put guidance around presumption of access and disclosure, that's been embedded in, particularly in US approaches for decades. It's now fairly common in the UK. You look at promotion of open source and how you procurement guidance to government, again, gives them the direction to start, one, making use of these tools, two, making access and reuse of the tools they do create part of it, and actually UK government trying to become an active contributor to open source, both at the code level and the data level. And that kind of guidance about how you run what otherwise is a boring bit of back office IT stuff, actually making that a useful thing more broadly is hugely useful. So potentially look at the other bits of government that at first light aren't obviously connected to innovation by others, but actually deeply are. And in a very connected world they are, and we have to get our heads around that as well.
Okay. Any other questions? This question right here. Yeah.
Yeah, Bob Holland's infrastructure consultant. So what financial value to the community would gigabit internet access to the taxpayer provide?
To the taxpayer. Okay, that's a great question.
That means to the home or to where they are from a mobility or from a home office perspective, etc.
Sure. I just jumped in there. I'm sorry. I don't know why I did that.
Go for it.
I know why you did, but go ahead.
So the fact is, let me just back it up here to the intelligent communities, the communities that are winning these awards internationally. And this started 12 years ago, an organization that's a bit of a think tank in New York with a Canadian, John Young, as its founding chair, started selecting the Intelligent Community of the Year 12 years ago. And today they get 400 applications from communities around the world, and they narrow it to the top 21, and the final 7, the top 7, and so on. Without exception, the winners of that award, and I would say just about all of the top 7, have had faster rates of economic growth than their neighbors, creating faster employment, new employment faster, more social innovation. And there's an environmental element there too. So if you have a community where you're getting more social innovation, it's growing, and digital diversity is a big important part of being an intelligent community. So it's not just about the high-tech companies or somebody getting rich over here. It's creating a balanced community. Then this is a good thing for citizens, for the taxpayers, for the community that's getting more tax base and everything else. Now, how are you going to do it? One of the worst words in the language today that's confusing us all is the word broadband. It's like asphalt. And the reason I say that is, you know, back in the 20s, if you said, geez, we got asphalt on our streets. Well, isn't that great? We're smart enough to know that, well, like how wide is your street? But not everybody understands that on the communications side. Just so we got broadband. Well, of course, we all know, we hear, there are big differences. And so the higher level networks, the higher the bandwidth and everything else, the more you can do with it on the social side in terms of new kinds of education, new ways of delivering health care, better service, lower cost. And I can go down the list. I'm part of the Google Summit, the Gigabit Summit that's involved with Kansas City. They've picked one, and they're going to wire up a few communities. It's meeting monthly for a year, identifying all the benefits and the new ways these applications will run, because it's a different world. But it's all about economic development, social development, and environmental.
Thanks, Bill. So maybe as a final thought, I'm going to ask the other members of the panel just to comment on that, but if you go back to the first question around vision, so your final thought is, why should we? What's the benefit? I mean, why should we care? Why should we create the digital metropolis?
So,
Jeff?
I'm going to touch on social cohesion, which was an issue this morning. Toronto's asking itself some tough questions in the last few days about this. we just introduced a program called Rec Access, which is giving away empty spots in rec programs to low-income households. We can do that because we now have the technology to very quickly figure out how many people are in how many programs and get the information out to low-income households about empty spaces in programs. That helps us fill programs, which costs us nothing, to your taxpayer point. It helps people who aren't part of the community programs get access to it. It leads to better health outcomes and all those sorts of good things as well. And ultimately, it helps us run programs that we wouldn't be able to otherwise run, because if we have 5 people, we don't run a Pilates class, but if we have 10 people, we do. It's such a simple thing. That technology allows for social cohesion, so, or at least a step in that direction. It's one of the ways that cities, doing something very simple, can use technology to improve their service delivery and pursue that vision of a more cohesive metropolis, in addition to all of the economic benefits that we've been discussing earlier. Thanks.
I think if you look forward, if you don't build and maintain a digital fabric for your metropolis, then the social fabric and its physical fabric will decay. You won't actually be able to sustain them, because the global competitive nature of innovation, the global nature of where talent, resource and activity is happening is driven by that digital fabric being available. So if you don't build it, you won't actually be able to maintain the physical city and the social city we're so used to. It's inherent in the future of those two as well.
Absolutely. Final word?
The only thing I would add is that beyond what we've heard here and how it impacts society and business, and that is, it's a shame if we don't do it. It's all available today. We're not even the first to do it anymore, and it's really, I think, about making a decision to get on with it and embrace this new world. Everybody will be better off for it, and change is a little scary, but somebody's got to lead the way and take us there, because if we don't embrace it, Canada really won't be in a great place, not too far down the road relative to even where we are today, I believe.
Just make one final comment. I have 14 grandchildren, one great-grandson. It's a miracle of modern medicine that somebody as young as me should have a great-grandson. But I want us to do all of this so that they're living in one of the leading countries of the world. That's why.
Thanks, Bill. So thanks very much to the panel. We're 1 minute and 1 second over, but that's not too bad.
Not bad.
So with that, Ilse, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you.